A very good morning to Dr. Nadia. So I'm Dina binti Anwar, and for today, me and Farisha and Shafika will be doing the topic of flowering plants reproduction. So under this topic, we'll be explaining more regarding the sexual reproductive strategies. So the presentation overview, I'm Dina. I'll be doing the life cycle overview and also the flower. Farisha Hana will be doing the flower structure and also the variations in flower structure. Meanwhile, Shafika will be doing the life cycle in details and also cross-pollination. Okay, so under life cycle overview, so how does this life cycle actually work? So when plants reproduce sexually, they will undergo two alternations of generation in which they alternate between two multicellular stages, which are one haploid and another one is diploid. So in flowering plants, diploid saprophyte is dominant. So since it is dominant, it is the portion of the life cycle that bears the flower. So a flower is basically the reproductive structure of an angiosperm, which produces two types of spores, which are microspores and also megaspores. So firstly, haploid microspores, they will undergo mitosis to actually produce pollen grain, which is either wind-blown or carried by animal to the vicinity of the female gametophyte. Besides that, haploid megaspores will also undergo mitosis but to produce to become female gametophyte. So what is female gametophyte? So female gametophyte is basically an embryo sac within the ovule, which is within the ovary. Okay, so at maturity, the pollen grain normally it will contain a non-flagellated sperm, which then will travel to the embryo sac through a pollen tube. So when the sperm actually fertilizes the egg, zygote will become an embryo which is within the ovule. So then ovule will turn into seeds and ovary will turn into fruits, which aids in the dispersing of the seeds. So when seeds germinate, a new sporophyte will emerge, and then through growth and mitosis, it will become a mature organism. Okay, I'll be explaining about the anatomy of a flower. Okay, so in a flower structure, we have a pistil. So what is a pistil? So pistil is basically a component that actually contains three components, which is a stigma, style, and also ovary. Next, we also have stamen. So stamen contains anther and also filament, and then the big part of the flower is actually a petal, and then we also have ovule in the center, and then we have a sepal, we have a receptacle, and also we have a peduncle. Farisha will explain more on the details of the structure of the flower. So next, I'll be presenting regarding the monocot versus eudicote flowers. So now we are going to look through the differences between monocot versus eudicote flowers. So what are the differences? Well, in terms of flower, monocot tend to have flower parts or flower petals in a multiple of 3, while eudicote flowers normally tend to have flower parts or petals in a multiple of 4 or 5. So as an example, black-eyed Susan, they normally have 21 petals, which is a multiple of 3. So that makes the black-eyed Susan as a monocot flower. Next, a wild rose normally has 5 petals, so it is a eudicote flower. Next, in terms of leaves, monocot tends to have a parallel venation, while the eudicote tends to have a net venation. Lastly, in terms of roots, monocots usually have adventitious roots, while eudicotes usually have top roots. I'm going to continue the presentation with the details of the flower structure, as Dina has mentioned all those flower structure. Now I'm going to continue with the functionality of the flower structure. So the first one is the sepals, which is the leaflet. Usually it's green in color. It is used to protect the bud as the flower develops within, and collectively known as calyx. Next is the petals, which is the pink bright color. The color becomes the most attractive part of the flower. The size, shape, and also the color is used to attract specific pollinators. But some wind pollinated flowers doesn't have petals and collectively known as corolla. So now moving on to the male portion of the flower, which is the stamens. It consists of 2, filament and also anther. The filament is the slender stalk to support the anther, and the anther is the sac-like. The pollen grains develop from the microspore inside the anther. and then the anther will release all this pollen into the air or into the pollinator. Moving on to the female portions of the flower, which is known as pistil or carpel. It consists of 4: stigma, style, ovary, and also ovule. So the style is a slender stalk to support the stigma. The stigma is an enlarged sticky knob. Because of its stickiness, it is used to catch and trap the pollen from the air or also from the pollinators. Next is the ovary. Ovary is an enlarged base that includes one or more ovules. So a flower doesn't specific to have one ovules, but it can contain more than one ovules. So what is ovule? Ovule is the production megaspore and contain the female reproductive cell, which is the egg cell, and it will develop into seed once it is fertilized. So all these flower parts, it is attached to the receptacles, and the receptacle is attached to the pedicle. So now let's look at all these variations in flower structures. So we have two different variation, which is the dioecious or monoecious. So generally, monoecious is the plant, a plant with both male and female portions, while dioecious it only contain one portions, either male or female, in a plant. So for the first part is the dioecious individuals, which you can see a plant is only contained of stamen, or another one has only pistil. So it is called as dioecious. So the next one, the B and C are both monoecious, but the difference is this one the B has the hermaphrodite with bisexual flower, which is perfect because it contains both male and female portion in one flower or in a plant, while the C is a monoecious too, but it contains two different types of flower, which is one has the female portion while another one has the male portions, but it contains in a plant. Okay, so these types of variation is considered as dioecious or monoecious in a plant. Okay, the clue is in a plant. If it contains both male portion and female portion, is monoecious, while if only contains one, is dioecious. So this is the examples of the variations in flower structure. So for the monoecious the example is the maize plant, which you can see the male flower head at the upper part of the maize plant. It contains all those male portions, while at the bottom part of the plant contains all the females portions of the flower. On the other hand, the dioecious example is the holly trees, which both are the species of holly trees, but one plant contains of only female flowers, but another plant contains only male flowers, but both are holly tree species. As you can see here, the female flowers only contains the female portions, while the male, you can see the anther and also the filament, while the female, you can clearly see this stigma. So that's it.
Flowering plants, or as known as angiosperms, produce microspores and also megaspores. The microspores will become a matched male gametophyte or the pollen grain, and the megaspores will become a matched female gametophyte or embryo sex. We move on to the next slide. There are three stages to form a new sporophyte, which are: the first step is the development of male gametophyte, the second step is the development of female gametophyte, and the last step is the development of new sporophyte. So right now I'm going to explain the development of male gametophyte first. Microspores produced in the anthers of the flowers. So this is the anthers of the flowers. And One anther has 4 pollen sacs and each containing many microspore mother cells. So this is the pollen sac. Next, a microspore mother cell will undergo meiosis and produce 4 haploid microspores. And then the haploid nucleus will divide mitotically and produce a pollen grain, which is the immature male gametophyte. The pollen grain consists of a tube cell and a generative cell. And later on, the tube cell will produce a pollen tube and the generative cell will produce 2 sperms. And once these events have taken place, the pollen grain has become a matured male gametophyte. So right now, we are at the second stage, which is the development of female gametophyte. Ovary contains 1 or more ovules, and the ovule has parenchyma cell that almost completely covered by the integuments except for the micropyle. So as we can see here, the integuments cover all of the ovule except the micropyle. Next, one parenchyma cell will enlarge, become a megaspore mother cell. And the megaspore mother cell will undergo meiosis and then produce 4 haploid megaspores. But 3 of them are non-functional, only 1 of them is functional, which is the surviving megaspore. Okay, the nucleus of the functional megaspore will divide mitotically until there are 8 nuclei in the female gametophyte. As we can see here, if we total up 3 plus 2 plus 1 plus 2, we get 8. And the female gametophyte or the embryo sac consists of the 1 egg cell, which is associated with 2 synergic cells, 1 central cell with 2 polar nuclei, and 3 antipodal cells. So now we are at the last stage, which is the development of new sporophyte. When the pollen grains are ready to be released, the walls separating the pollen sacs in the anther will break down. Pollination can be explained by the transferring of the pollen from the anther to the stigma. When the pollen grain lands on the stigma of the same species, here, it will germinate and form a pollen tube. This is a pollen tube. And then the germinated pollen grain contains tube cell and 2 sperms, like I explained on the development of male gametophyte. And then the pollen tube pass between the cells of the stigma and the style to reach the micropyle, the only part that integuments not covered. And the double fertilization occurs. One of the sperm will unite with the egg, and form 2 zygote, and another sperm will unite with the polar nuclei and form 3 endosperm. So the ovule begins to develop into seed. The important aspect of seed development is the formation of the seed coat from the ovule wall. And a matured seed contains the embryo, the stored food, and the seed coat. Finally, we are at the last slide of our presentation, which is cross-pollination. There are 2 types of pollination, which are self-pollination and cross-pollination. So I'm going to explain the difference between both of them. The self-pollination occurs if the pollen is from the same plant. Meanwhile, the cross-pollination occurs if the pollen is from a different plant but same species. Some of the flowering plants, such as grass and grains, rely on wind pollination, and much of the energy goes into making pollen to ensure that the pollen grains reach the stigma. And the amount of pollen transferred is staggering. Meanwhile, most of angiosperms rely on animals such as birds, mammals, or insects to carry out pollination. So as we can see on the slide, it's the example of the cross-pollination by a bee. The first one, pollen from stamens will stick to a bee as it visits a flower to collect their food. And next, the bee will travel to another plant of the same type. Last, the pollen on the bee will stick to a pistil of a flower on the other plant. And that's how cross-pollination occurs.
So that's it for me, Shafiqa and also Farisha. Thank you, doctor. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay home.